Hey, it's Chico, and in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about assignment of contract. Now, getting this part right in your real estate wholesaling business is critical because the last thing you want to do is put yourself in a position where you've done all the work to generate the motivated seller leads. You have got the property sold to a buyer, and then in the process of trying to get it assigned to the buyer, you mess everything up and now all of your work goes down the drain. And I don't want that to happen to you. So what I want to do here is give you some tips and tricks on how to properly have a conversation with the buyer, what the procedure should be for your assignment of contracts. And that way you can go ahead and make sure that you don't drop the ball at the very, very end. Because that's the last thing I'd want you to do, is to drop the ball right before you are going to get paid. Because there's only one other thing that is actually worse than dropping the ball right before you get paid. And that is you not subscribing to the channel. Yes, that's right. If you are not a subscriber, I would encourage you to subscribe because again, that's your toll booth. I have a little tip jar, and then you just put the tip in there and all you got to do is subscribe. Now, if you really like the show, then you maybe hit the notification bell. However, if you are already a subscriber, then all you got to do is just simply like the video, or maybe just make a comment and say, Chico, that was some good stuff you put together. All right, so now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Now, for the uninformed here, if you're not familiar, I specifically do real estate wholesaling, and wholesaling is where we go out and we find a property. We find a property owner who has a property that they would like to sell and that they would be reasonable enough to consider selling that property at a discount. We then take that property and we agree to buy it. And then in the process of doing that, we would say, you know what, I'm not in a position to close right now on the property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that contract that I have with the owner and I'm going to sell it. I'm going to go ahead and sell it to another real estate investor who would be interested in taking over that deal. And I'm going to then, when I do that, I'm going to assign that contract. And when I assign the contract, I basically take my document with the seller, give it to another real estate investor, and they agree to pay me a fee. And that fee could be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to, as much as the biggest assignment fee that I ever made was one for $98,000. I'm not saying that you're going to make $98,000 on an assignment fee. However, the possibilities are endless. And so it's the best way to get started as a real estate investor because you don't need any cash, credit, or any of that stuff. You're not buying or closing on any sort of property. What you're doing is you're an expert. You are an expert at finding motivated sellers and putting those deals together. And that is the most lucrative part of the business, because even if you wanted to rehab properties, even if you said, Chico, I just love taking houses and tearing them up and making them all brand new and amazing, guess what? At the end of the day, you can't do that if you got no sellers, if you've got no deals to work with. So getting and finding deals is the most important part of the business, and wholesaling is one of the most lucrative ways to get started with real estate investing. And part of that process of selling that contract to another real estate investor is getting an assignment of contract executed with that buyer so they can close on the property, and a few weeks later or maybe a few days later, they can go ahead and show up to the closing with the money. The seller gets their money and you get the difference of what you negotiated with the buyer. All right, so the first tip I'm going to give you here, I'm going to write it down here, is number one is sign last, okay? Whenever we send an offer to a seller to purchase our property, and I'm not going to get into it too deep in this video because it's not the nature of this video here, but whenever I send a contract to a seller, an offer to purchase a property, I am always going to send that agreement to the seller, and I'm going to sign that agreement to show the fact that I'm ready to go. All they got to do is sign and we've got a deal. With a buyer, with an assignment of contract, we never sign first. We always send the assignment of contract to them, they review it, they sign it, and then they send it back to us. And at that point, when we get that assignment of contract back, is when we execute it. And the reason for that is we don't want to happen. See, with the sellers, if we send the contract out and they take forever, I mean, they're like, 2 months later, we've forgotten about it, and then they finally send that contract back. Well, we have an inspection period on the contract, which says that if we can back out of the deal if it's not what we thought it was going to be. And so even at worst case scenario, if you forgot about the deal and they sign the contract and send it to you, at the very end, you can always cancel the contract. If I have a deal and it's a hot deal and you're a buyer and you say, Chico, I want the deal, and I send you the assignment of the contract, I sign it and I send it to you. And now I lose touch with you. I can't get a hold of you. You're not answering my calls. You're nowhere to be found. You haven't made a deposit on the deal or anything like that. Then I'm stuck. I'm stuck because I put my signature on that assignment. It's out there now. I can't sign with somebody else, because if I sign with somebody else and you send that assignment of contract to me, then all of a sudden now I got problems. Now you could put on an assignment of contract, we need to get this executed back by this date, and also we need a deposit. And so there's various things that you can put in the assignment of contract to protect yourself against that. But I would rather just not sign it at all and tell the buyer, look, you got to get this thing over to me signed. I'm making that commitment to you verbally here, but I need that back to me by 5 o'clock today. Now, as a rule of thumb, and this is kind of a side thing, if you're my buyer and I talk to you, and I make that final deal and I say, I will sell you the property for $100,000. That includes my assignment fee. Are you okay with that? And you say yes. And I say, I'm going to go ahead and send you this assignment of contract. It doesn't have my signature. You got to sign it first. As soon as you get it, as soon as you get it back to me, I'll sign it. But I got to get it back to me by 5 o'clock today. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to look for somebody else. Now, let's say I get off the phone with you, and then 2 minutes later, I get a guy that calls me up and says, I'm willing to offer you $10,000 more. I've made that commitment to you already. I'm not going to back out of that commitment. Now, if you fail on that and you don't get me what I need in time, then now I got free reign. But I always say that you always want to keep your word in this business, especially when dealing with buyers. You want to be able to keep your word, so that means that you also have to be careful about the commitments that you make to people when you're talking to them on the phone, because it will hold you to that. I should do another video on that, because a lot of times I talk about the fact that, sometimes when you talk to buyers, they want to kind of get you to say yes, and you have to make sure of the clear understanding. Like if I get off a conversation with a buyer, and I will always clarify, I said, okay, let me just make sure that we're on the same page. I'm agreeing to sell you the property for $100,000. I'm going to send you this assignment. It's unsigned by me. You're going to receive it. You're going to send it back to me by 5 o'clock. And then I need you tomorrow morning before 12 o'clock noon. I need you to deposit $10,000 in the escrow account of the title company. If you don't do that, if you fail on any one of those things, I will sell the property to someone else. Are we clear on that? Perfect. Okay, great. I'm going to do that. Now, if somebody else comes in, offers me more money, guess what? I can't do it. I can't do it. Why? Because I gave you my word. And that's a very important thing. So anyway, they always sign first. You always sign last. Number two, when you're negotiating with them on price. Now, part of the assignment, when you're giving somebody the assignment of contract, you also have to deliver to them the actual sales contract. And that is because the reason why you have to deliver to them the sales contract is because by signing the assignment of contract, they're taking on all the responsibilities that were with your contract with the seller. So they need to see a copy of that contract with the seller. Now, that being the case, if you're a buyer and I'm negotiating with you, all right, I'm not going to send you any of the paperwork. If you say to me, hey, Chico, can I see the contract with the original seller before I commit to you or do the final negotiations? The answer is no. You have to be willing to negotiate with me, and we're going to have that back and forth and finally come to a price before I send you anything. So all negotiations must take place before I send you any of the documents, because when I send you that assignment of contract, you're going to see my contract, and then you're going to see what I paid. And so then at that point, if you have an issue with the assignment, then I'll know that up front, right? Because if you negotiated a price with me and then all of a sudden you get cold feet because you're like, man, I think you're making too much money, then at least we know that up front and I can deal with that. And that's not the purpose of this video here. But bottom line is that I'm going to negotiate with you. We're going to agree on the price before I ever send you anything. Now, I'm going to do another video on when should you do an assignment versus a double closing, because that's another question I get asked many times. Depending on the nature of the assignment fee and how big it is, the bigger the assignment fee, the more money you're making, the likelier is that you want to do a double closing to make sure that you protect yourself and that you're not going to have any problems with the seller or not going to have any problems with the buyer. But again, let's say that now this depends on your market. It depends on the property price too as well. If I've got a $300,000 property and I'm making 30 grand relative to the purchase price of the property, that's not that big of an assignment fee. Also, if I'm making 30 grand on an assignment fee, if I were to double close on that transaction, because the sales price is so high, it would eat up a lot of the closing costs will eat up a lot of the profit on that deal. So those are things you have to take into consideration. However, I'm not going to discuss that in this video. I will, however, make a note to make another video on should you assign or should you double close. Keep an eye on that. So again, that's number 2 would be is negotiate first. So I'm going to put on here negotiate first. All right. Now, the next step I'm going to give you, and again, I'm looking at my notes, not at my phone. That would be rude if I'm texting or watching myself on YouTube while I'm recording a YouTube video for you. That would be seen kind of odd. Number 3 is deposit. Okay. I'm going to put more deposit. All right. Now, if I have, let's say I have a deal with a seller and I put $100 deposit on the assignment. Excuse me, I put $100 deposit on the original contract. Now, if I'm going to sell you that deal, you're going to have to put up a deposit. However, you're going to have to put a deposit that's more than the $100. So many times at a minimum, and it really depends on your market, etc. But for me, we ask for $5,000. So on the assignment of contract, it's going to say that it's $5,100 deposit. Let's say I put $100 deposit with the seller, or in my example, and I want $5,000 from you. I'm going to say that this assignment is you're going to have to put up $5,100. $100 goes toward the original contract, and then $5,000 is for this assignment. And that is, and I don't want to make this a big video about just how to write up an assignment of contract, but that deposit that you put in there is a non-refundable deposit. Obviously, if we can't get clear title or something out of the blue, but if you want to back out at the last minute, you're going to lose that money. But you need to put a deposit with them. You need to have them put a deposit with them to make sure that they're serious. And that deposit many times is going to have to be greater than what the deposit is that you have with the seller. Finally, but not least, okay, I'm going to put here close sooner. Close sooner. What that means is, let's say that you have a closing date. Right now, when I'm recording this video, is the 12th of the month. And let's say that I have a closing date with the seller for the 31st of the month. When I do my assignment of contract, I'm going to put on the assignment of contract that you're going to close on a particular date. And that date is going to be before the contract that I have with the seller. That way, if you fall behind, then we have a little bit of time left before we actually have to close with the seller. Or what if at the last minute, you can't get your hard money lender, you can't get your crap together, you decide that you don't want the deal at the last minute, but if I have the closing date for our assignment on the 31st and there's a closing date for the seller on the 31st, then I've run out of time. But if I have the assignment says you got to close on the 23rd or 24th or the 25th, I recommend like 3 or 4 days before. If the closing date is listed as the 24th, for example, and on the 24th you don't close, well, the title is ready, everything is ready to go. So now at least I've got like 3 or 4 days to try to find me another buyer to be able to then close on the deal. And I will keep the deposit, because if you back out of the deal, then I'm going to get the $5,000, but I'm going to go ahead and sell the deal. And so that's why you want to be able to close sooner than the date that you have on the deposit, on the original contract that you have with the seller. And those are my 4 essential tips for assignment of contracts. Do me a favor. I want to know, I got these 4. I'd be interested to know what maybe tips you have up your sleeve. Do you have a tip that I didn't cover here that you say, Chico, you should have covered that tip because this tip is good? I'd like to know. Did I miss anything? Do you disagree with any of the tips? Do you do things differently and when it comes to the assignment of contracts? I would like to know that. So if you can post a comment, let me know. I read through all the comments. I'll respond to you. Love to have a dialogue with you. And again, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you watch. In the link to the description is a training that I have on how to find motivated sellers on Facebook. Watch that training because it's really good. It'll teach you how to go out and find motivated sellers using Facebook ads. And then that way you can do more of these and get paid.